So I'm Jasmine and I'm facilitating, as Caitlin mentioned. Today's session is really exciting. It's on elevating staff voice, and we're joined by two amazing panelists. First off, Dr. Diarese George, the founder and executive director of the Tennessee Educators for Color Alliance. He is a Possip partner himself. They send staff pulse checks. And we're also joined by our very own reporting team lead, Amanda Richards, who can speak to trends in staff pulse checks and has experience as a former teacher, assistant principal, and principal. So we're super excited to have Amanda and Dr. Diarese on the panel today. And you can learn more about them by the links that are going to be put into the chat. But we'll go ahead and move on to our panel. And Lauren will be spotlighting Amanda, Dr. Diarese, and myself. So if you click speaker view, you'll be able to see all three of us spotlighted. That way you have a really great view of the panel. Just a Zoom tip for you. Awesome. So I'll go ahead and get started. 1 minute. So I want to start off with a question for Diarese. In general, why is staff voice important? This is a big conversation, so we want to cue it up by just talking about why it matters.
Yeah, thanks so much for the question, Jasmine. Thanks so much for the invitation and to be able to join you today. Staff voice is extremely important, I think, in the education space beyond students. Staff voices is probably the next thing that you want to lean in on, especially when you think about leaders and organizations. Sometimes they can be removed more from the day-to-day things that take place. So staff voice is extremely important to be able to kind of get a sense of what's going on the ground in spaces within schools. And also allows you to be able to pivot and make adjustments to be able to ensure that they're supported, healthy, value, and all the things in between to make sure things stay functioning.
Yeah, I like how you put that. It's important to make sure their voices are there so that leadership can happen, things continue to function and work well within the system. So I want to ask you to tell us a little bit more about the Tennessee Educators of Color Alliance, which stands for TECA, and why staff voice is important to you in your role as executive director of it.
Sure. So I'm actually a former educator myself. I worked in higher ed. I taught for almost 6 years, and then worked as an administrator and an ed prep provider, training people to be teachers. And so I've seen it from a lot of different angles, but for TECA, our work is to support educators of color to stay in the space and then leverage their voices to make systemic change in the education ecosystem. And so for us, I think sometimes, you got to center the people who are closest to the challenges and the problems in order to understand how to generate the solutions to solve them and drive things forward. We live in a state where 40% of our students are people of color, and our educators of color make up less than 15%. So it's extremely important, especially when you're dealing with the least represented, to really understand the value that brings and also how to cultivate it. And so if you're not listening to people to understand explicitly what that looks like, how that feels, you're not going to be very instrumental in your solutions. A lot of times people lean on quantitative data, which is good, but qualitatively, you got to literally lean in and understand what are going on with people. It's one thing to say, hey, I'm racially isolated in my building. It's another thing to really understand how that shows up and what that feels like. So you can be really strategic in how you solve things. So for us, there's not a district or partner that we actually go into an agreement with without the understanding that we're going to be leaning to listen and learn from our educators of color in those spaces, so that when we say, hey, these are the things we're going to use to drive forward innovation, solution, and support, it's not coming from us as an external organization. It's coming from people who literally work and serve in the district. And oftentimes, many districts just don't have the systems in place to tap into that voice in a very honorable manner.
Yeah, that's really powerful. I like how you put that, centering the people closest to the work and making sure that their voices are the ones driving the decision making and communicating that with the districts and school partners that you communicate with. Amanda's work as reporting lead, she has the opportunity to kind of understand staff trends across the country and to kind of understand, what other people in different states are saying. So Amanda, I want to ask you too, what's a general tone you're hearing from staff pulse checks across the nation?
Yeah, thanks for having me. And Dr. Diarese, I love your tone. You're so empathetic. So I think that's super cool to hear you say all of that. So But the main trend that I'm really hearing over this semester that I'm thinking is impacting the tone is really teachers are feeling overwhelmed and really overextended with their workload, with their current workload. And I think the tone feels pretty heavy when teachers are talking about this topic in particular. And I can really feel it when I'm reading the reports. And one thing that I'm also seeing connected to this trend is that teachers are honestly worried about losing some peer teachers on campus because of this workload and just because of the difficulties that they're facing right now. And we all know when teachers leave, it kind of does add an extra burden to the teachers who are staying. So I'm reading a lot about that in staff pulse checks. And I don't know if people have seen it yet, but the National Education Association did put out some data from a survey that they administered in January of 2022, so just recently, about the percent of teachers who are kind of thinking of leaving the profession. So I'd love to just start with a poll to get some engagement and get some guesses on this number. What percent of teachers do you think are thinking about leaving the classroom this year? So I'll just give you a second to do that. And then Lauren or Jasmine, if you want to let me know when the poll closes. Awesome. Yeah. So I see the results. Looks like there was kind of a wide variety between 45 to 65 majority. And the answer is 55%. So over half of teachers are actually thinking about leaving the profession. And that's on top of the teachers that have already left. So just thinking about that number, it's really important to get that staff voice because that's such a huge factor in what leaders are facing right now is teacher turnover. And in the same study, they actually talked about the top issue that educators are facing right now is burnout. And 90% of teachers are reporting that burnout is a really serious or somewhat serious issue. So almost all teachers are saying that burnout is somewhat of a serious issue. So our Possip trends are definitely aligned with these results, and teachers are sharing just really helpful and tangible action steps in Possip reports also. So I know there's like this tone of like feeling overwhelmed, but they're also sharing ideas of what's going to help them feel less burned out through Possip. And if you were in the first session, there was an awesome example of this trend through KIPP Nashville, and Randy was on the panel, and he kind of talked about how they use their Possip staff report data to really make positive changes in their district, and they're seeing it in turnover, or in like, not having turnover in their staff. And also in relation to this teacher turnover data, there's also a tone of uncertainty that I'm picking up where teachers are also asking a lot about like next year questions and want early answers to specific questions they have about next year, just to get clarity so that they can feel confident coming back. And this quote up on the screen also kind of brings another point about, schools are made up of more than just teachers. And there's a diverse range of role types and people that make a huge impact in schools: bus drivers, substitutes, food service workers, and they're also needing their voice heard because they're crucial to schools. So Possip does partner with districts around the country to hear from those stakeholders too, to get information on how they're doing and how they're feeling, because they are so important. So this was a quote from an op-ed in the Washington Post. In Boston, they have a 20% job vacancy rate since the summer in their food services department, which directly impacts students. And they are 100 bus monitors short and 30 bus drivers short any given day. So just thinking about the importance of hearing from those staff members also in schools is really important. And just one last thing, I do see bright spots. Like there's a lot of positive things that are coming out in pulse checks. Like this past district, we just had a whole district ask a bonus question about teacher appreciation and like, who do you appreciate at the school? And they had such inspiring shout outs for teachers that are just doing really heroic things right now that need to be shouted out. And I love seeing that in Possip reports. So those are kind of like the tones that I'm hearing.
Yeah, that's really great, Amanda. Thank you for sharing that. And I like how you put, the shout out piece is really important, giving space to voice, who do you see on your team who's doing a great job? Let us know so we can shout them out. I think that's powerful. So I do want to direct another question to Dr. Diarese. what has been some of the impact that you've seen of getting routine feedback from TECA?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think when we begin our partnerships with, right now we have 2 district partnerships and we have 2 more that will enter next year. These are our larger metropolitan districts. And, one of the things that we realized very quickly was like, one, like there was no system for feedback and, very quick feedback, particularly with educators of color in districts. And then the other thing is that the reason why we even started a partnership is because we were trying to address retention within the district. The districts have all these robust, Tennessee is known to have all these grow your own strategies. We invest a lot of money in trying to recruit, but we have not done our due diligence, I feel sometimes, where it comes to keeping people. In most of these larger districts, we lose more people than we recruit year over year. We've dug into the data and we realized attrition was the biggest problem. When folks are recruiting 30, 40, 50 educators, they're turning around and losing 60, 70, 80. So they're losing more in some districts than what they're recruiting. And most of this exodus doesn't necessarily take place like for all the educators of the call during the winter break. We were seeing it happening during the summer. So people were finishing the year and then you see you would see 10 people, 5 to 10 people in the middle of the semester, 30, 40, 50 at the end of the year. And so what we wanted to use the pulse checks for was a way to be able to kind of gauge how people are feeling along the way so we can make adjustments to their needs in real time. And so the value of what we've seen is the first main question we're asking is like, are you happy in your work environment? And so what we've seen happen immediately, we had about, the first Possip check-in, post check, we had about 15 people say no, 45 said, about 20% said no, 40 said yes, and then another 40 were kind of on the fence in the middle. The last most recent report that we had, so this started in November and we're now in March, half of those mostly in the middle have moved over to yes. So now we see 68% saying yes, 15% saying no, and then there's that mostly in the middle. And so in real time, what we've been able to do month to month, in addition to also like listening to the feedback. So we instituted optional affinity groups that meet monthly so people can connect, because one of the biggest things that we heard was like, I'm the one of 2 in my building, but I don't know the next person in the building next to me or the next building over. And so creating space where people can connect, that actually came out of additional feedback that we got through Possip and also some instruments that we use ourselves when we first came into the district, and being able to act in real time. And then within that affinity space, being able to build committees and building, lanes for professional development, opportunities for people to really understand how they can prepare themselves for leadership opportunities, all came from feedback that we've been getting month to month. So initially creating a space, and then from creating a space, being able to literally institute supports that people are saying that they need, that will allow them to be able to get better. I think that's been a driving force in making the shift from what we've seen in people kind of on the fence about their work environment, which we know largely plays a huge role in whether or not people will stay, and then them actually saying like, oh, I feel better about this now. And I think honestly, it's a shift from lip service. A lot of people will do the first part of like gathering the information, trying to figure out what's going on, but it's the institution of supports moving forward that I think allows people to say, okay, they're for real about this. And I think us being able to have that pulse check beyond the initial stakeholder engagement we did in the beginning of the summer added an extra layer of continuous communication, which again, like I said, most people don't have that set up in their districts. And if they do have it, there's oftentimes a mistrust that exists that allow people to truly authentically engage. And so I think the fact that we're running the Possip pulse check is not ran by the district, it's coming from us. People have a level of comfort and they're being able to be honest and vulnerable in ways that I don't think that they have been, or even have had the opportunity with the dishes that they're serving in.
Yeah, wow. You said a lot of really great stuff. I'm thinking about how you talked about just the need to make adjustments in real time, and how, you hope to catch people who are saying mostly or no in the middle of the year to adjust over time so that by the end of the year, they stay around. And I think that's really powerful. And also those affinity groups and creating that space for community, a direct result of suggestions that people made and taking action based on staff voice. So I love that. I'm seeing Shawnee put in the chat, I'm curious for Dr. Diarese, how they bridge the information they get back to the schools and districts where the educators work. Like, how do you take, what you've heard from the staff and make sure it's communicated to the district or the school leaders?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I have an ongoing check-in with the human resources talent team. And so anytime that that report comes available, I share it with the team. And sometimes like it's things that we can react to and we can do like within the reach of our own organization. But sometimes it's things that the district needs to know and be able to react to accordingly. Sometimes it's just people saying, hey, you know, our AC isn't always working in our building. Or, you know, we've had some infestation in our, like things like that, that I think the district needs to know. But I think because we have a system in place where there's constant communication. So we're meeting through affinity groups. I meet every other week with their talent team. We're going over this report. We're going over what the feedback that we have from surveys from the affinity space. And I think it allows us to kind of be preemptive in some regards to jump in front of some of these things. But I think, again, having a system in place and making sure that, and to be honest with you, I think the other thing, and I don't know, it was Caitlin's on the call, like the district was so impressed with the secular motion of the communication of that loop being created that now they're thinking about how do we institute this across the district, because right now it's us using it as an organization to support educators of color. But I've recently made a connection between the district and Caitlin, because now they're thinking about, oh, this will be good for all of our educators. How do we institute this and spread it? But again, it's the intentionality of being able to use the tool in such a way where that loop that's been created with the district office, they're now being able to see value and now potentially want to scale that the post check across the district with all educators, which I think is just, it's invaluable. That's a great way to go about getting a quick touch point, especially during those most challenging times of the year, like we're heading in now with testing season, to kind of get a sense of where people are and what supports they need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's powerful. And just starting takes a lot of bravery sometimes to get in feedback, but then using that feedback to make change and take action is really impressive and powerful. Amanda, I want to ask you, what would you say to leaders who are maybe nervous about receiving staff feedback? Maybe they're a principal or a school leader and they're thinking there's already so much going on. Maybe they feel like there's a lot of negativity, and there is. What would you say to them about how they can, elevate staff voice?
Yeah, that's a great question. And like, first, like feeling nervous about feedback is a normal feeling. It's like, right, it's actually science. Like our brain, and this has been a trend today, is like, don't be afraid to get feedback. But it's actually like our brains are responding to kind of like a threatening situation. So it is kind of that fight or flight response. So I think just acknowledging that like that is science and that happens when you're about to get feedback is really important. But also, like when I'm hearing that leaders are getting nervous about getting feedback, I think it's because they really care about what they're doing and they want to be leading their school well. But I think like a big question is, how are you going to know if you're meeting everyone's needs and being the best leader you can until you ask, right? So honestly, as a school principal, when I had a school down here in Dallas, I tended to be more nervous about what was potentially not being said to me and the impacts that could have down the road in my staff culture, retention, like overall teacher morale on campus. Because staff members are going to share the feedback somewhere. So actually might as well make it productive and hear it straight from the source so I can actually make positive changes happen. But two tangible things that kind of might make feedback feel less nerve-wracking is, first, to ask a positive question first, because again, like the science behind our brains is like, if we are getting positive feedback and reading some positivity, it actually like switches our capacity to hear and get constructive feedback. So like the district that I had, that we just had the other week, like that's a really great way to start things out, and it gives more capacity to share positivity to your staff too. So I think that's the first one. And then just more routines for leaders and teachers, like the less scary it gets less scary the more that you do it. And when you have those opportunities to build trust and create safe spaces to make that positive change, I think that's really important. And just modeling leadership by listening and acting with staff is going to also help your whole school community become a positive place, because then, it's going to be a domino effect where teachers, students, families all feel heard too. So.
Yeah, I love that. And like you said, sometimes you're wondering and maybe even more nervous thinking, what aren't they saying to me? And so the power of asking means that you can have that clarity as a leader to help you make decisions, to help you figure out what's fixable, within your school or district. So love that. So Dr. Diarese, when you think about the impact that the surveys have already had and what you hope to accomplish in the future, what are some of your long-term kind of goals as you continue to gather staff feedback?
Yeah, so I'm hoping that moving forward, as we continue to generate and develop district partnerships, we can continue, like Possip could just be a staple within that. So like right now, we're in a partnership with, or we just launched a more recent partnership with Knox County. We just kind of did some stakeholder engagement, and one of the recommendations that we made was like, hey, we need continual pulse checks. Just because there's an opportunity here to address attrition differently, and now that I have data that suggests like, hey, look what we're doing here in this district as an example, it was an easy like, yeah, let's build that into what we want to do. So my hope is like as we go into the next academic year, we'll also have pulse checks instituted in that district too as well. But I think we're looking longer down the road. I lead an organization that now has 3,000 people in the network. Of the 3,000, 70% are educators of color across the state, Middle, East, West Tennessee. Every district isn't going to sign up for a partnership in the ways that, Hamilton County, Knox County, all these other districts are doing it. But what I would hope is that maybe there's an opportunity down the road where we could create pulse checks just for people within our network, that we can have a broader snapshot of like what's going on across the state, urban, suburban, rural districts. In my conversation with rural districts, it's just even harder for them to establish just a general partnership, even without the inclusion of Possip, with built into our conversations, just because they're facing infrastructure challenges, literally in buildings that they want to address and things like that. And so, be able to get a pulse check from those few limited educators of color in a rural district can still add value to the overall thematic view of what we're trying to do here in the state. And I think that aligns really well with our more recently educated diversity policy that was adopted last year, where districts have to have goals now. They have to have recruitment and retention strategies. And I think that this can be a broader reach across a network of folk to be able to understand what are things looking like from different perspectives and educators in different roles across districts across the entire state. So short term, continue to build it in the partnership, and long term, I want to have a broader reach to really understand what's going on, especially where district partnership may not be in existence in some areas.
Yeah, I love to hear that vision and how y'all are so intentional about wanting to surface everyone's voice across the state in different types of districts, whether they're rural or suburban, et cetera. Like, that's great to hear that. I do want to open up the floor if there are any questions that anyone wants to put in the chat. This is open space for you to ask Amanda or Dr. Diarese real quick.
But Shawnee wanted to hear from Tulana. I hope I said it right. Get me if I didn't. About some of those strategies. I think we'd all benefit from that if you'd like to share more.
Okay. Hey. Sure. Come classroom here at Legacy, what we do is we go and we do several trainings actually, but it's pretty much as like deep breathing, chiming in and just listening to different sounds in the classroom. And we go in and show the scholars how to utilize several ways to calm themselves, whether it's deep breathing, closing their eyes to relax. And when they're at their highest peak after breakfast, coming in, from home, and once we do the books and breakfast each morning, well, it's on Wednesday morning, we do books and breakfast. And once they get to the classroom, the teachers want them to calm down. So they pretty much iterate something like, okay, for a minute, close your books, close your eyes, couple of deep breaths, hug yourselves, things like that, because we're not touching. So the kids kind of hug themselves, close their eyes, just do things that will help them to calm before they start instruction. And after lunchtime as well, we'll go back in and kind of talk to them about doing different things, just to kind of bring them back to focal as to what, before the teachers actually get started back teaching. So it helps. It helps a lot. And some of the kids have actually gone to sleep behind some of the strategies. So it works well.
Yeah, and what's so neat about strategies like that is you're really creating a space. So even though the space is for the students, it's also a space shared by the staff, right? So it's a whole
Yes.
culture.
I've noticed that teachers actually need those brain breaks. You have it's most of the teachers here, they're very young. So they have to kind of find a way to keep themselves calm in a comfortable way where they can be what I want to say, so they'll be able to instruct like they and teach, as they should. So some of those things that they just help to keep our teachers grounded, and it helps with the scholars as well.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. And I love hearing different ways to kind of elevate staff needs during the middle of the day as well, and have those
Yes.
calming resources for them too. I know it's 1:30, so some people might have to hop, but I did want to ask one final question to Amanda real quick. Amanda, you read all different types of staff reports from across the country. And I just want to know, like, as a former principal, as a reporting team lead at Possip, like, what do you hope for school staff across the country when you read this feedback?
Yeah, I have a lot of hopes when I read it. I think first is for like kind of the school and district leader hopes. Like I hope that they feel empowered and equipped by the reports because they're able to see just adjustable feedback and recommendations from our team at Possip to really live up to their greatest potential as a school and hear all of the diverse voices on the staff. So I think there's like a level for the district leaders. And then I also hope that it's positive morale builders for staff because we do see so many praise comments. So being able to, have leaders be able to have that information to shout out each other, I think is really important because teachers need to be appreciated. And I hope that they get to read all the amazing things that are said about them. And I hope that leaders involve teachers in decision-making processes and are able to have that information so that they can give them a voice, which will then kind of let teachers feel cared for and respected on their campus. And then finally, just that Possip creates a culture of feedback on campuses where everyone can give and receive feedback. It doesn't have to be just teachers that are constantly getting, observation feedback all the time, but that, they can give feedback to leaders. And I think it makes school better when every single person in the community has a voice and can give feedback. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Y'all have said so many great things about, adjusting over time, listening, meeting needs, and really just hopes and visions that everyone can be heard in school staff. So thank you all for your time today, Dr. Diarese and Amanda, and thank you all for joining and for your input. To Luna, thank you also for sharing. So have a great afternoon. Our last session is going to get started at 2 Central, 3 Eastern, and it'll be a Possip platform overview.